Hello, happy Friday. We are back with our next installation of artists and their pets. And today we are reading about Norman Rockwell, who was an American illustrator. All right, some Americana happening back here. All right. I wonder if that'll work. America's most famous illustrator, Norman Rockwell, painted 20th century American life for nearly 70 years, featuring many different people and his own pets and friends' dogs. They're painting people and their pets. Born in New York City in 1894, Norman Rockwell wanted to be an artist since he was a kid. At 14, he began art classes at the New York School of Art and later studied at the National Academy of Design and the Arts Students League. As a student, Rockwell worked in all sorts of part-time jobs, but by the time he was 18, he was earning enough from his art to live on. While he was still at the Art Students League, he was commissioned by a neighbor to paint 4 Christmas cards, and soon after, he was illustrating his first book. He was employed as an illustrator for the Boy Scouts magazine, Boy's Life. See a little picture of that there. I wonder if they still make that. It was his first regular job as an illustrator, and he stayed there for 3 years. In 1920, he painted a picture for the Boy Scouts calendar, and it was so popular that for the next 50 years, he painted an illustration for each calendar. For some time, Rockwell had wanted to paint cover pictures for the Saturday Evening Post as its cover illustrations were admired throughout the United States. When he was 22, with no appointment, he took a train to the magazine's headquarters in Philadelphia and showed the editor 2 paintings and 3 sketched ideas. As soon as he saw them, the editor of the magazine bought Rockwell's illustrations and asked him to turn the sketches into paintings. The first of these that appeared on the cover in May 1916 was Mother's Day Off, or Boy with Baby Carriage. It shows 3 boys, one dressed as a grown man pushing his baby sister in her pram, it's a carriage, and 2 in casual clothes teasing him. Billy Payne was the cheeky young boy who posed for all 3 boys in the picture, and he became one of Rockwell's favorite models. From their first meeting, Rockwell and George Horace Lorimer, the editor of the Post, got on well. Lorimer saw Rockwell's huge talent immediately. He could draw and paint and capture human characteristics and personality. He could also show his love and understanding of dogs' characters and behavior. And here you see Rockwell down with the dog, understanding him, giving him a treat. Dogs were important to Rockwell in his art and in real life. He often put them in prominent places in illustrations for their boldness and appeal. His own dogs went with him to the studio and dozed on the floor as he worked. He also borrowed neighbors' dogs to model, and he often included other animals, including chickens, horses, cows, and even deer and a bear. Oh. In a folder, Rockwell kept hundreds of photographs and magazine clippings of dogs to use as references. He preferred mongrels or dogs of no definable type of breed, so he labeled the folder Mutts. So he had all these images that he could be drawing and working from, these photographs he takes of dogs. I was thinking about that when I saw his camera off to the side here. I'm imagining, that was a very important tool to him to get those images when he'd see a dog walking by or something. That's pretty cool. Rockwell advised that any artist painting animals should draw and paint them just as carefully and understandingly as you paint the people. Over his life, he had several pet dogs who kept him company in the studio, including dogs named Pitter, Butch, Beagle, and Lassie. Here we see their illustrations, Pitter, Butch, Beagle, and Lassie. In the year that his first illustration appeared on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post, Rockwell married Irene O'Connor. Their marriage lasted from 1916 to 1929. During World War I, Rockwell applied to join the U.S. Navy, but they would not let him in as he was 8 pounds underweight. That evening, he filled himself up with lots of food and drink, including bananas and donuts, and the next day he reapplied and they allowed him in, but only as a military artist, not in a fighting position. My coffee cup is green. I wonder if it gets lost in the image. I bet today they would take him, underweight or not. Over the years, Rockwell's covers became well known and popular, and they even became collector's items. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh made the first solo flight across the Atlantic, inspiring the whole of America, and Rockwell created a cover to celebrate the event. For decades, his paintings captured the hearts of Americans and helped to raise the Saturday Evening Post to the status of America's magazine, with over 6 million subscribers at one point. So, I wouldn't say that there's necessarily like a magazine these days that are the biggest hit, because magazines are kind of going the way of the dinosaur, unfortunately. Except we are using them for collage today at my online art lesson. But, back then, they didn't have the internet, so magazines and newspapers were how you got all your gossip and celebrity and news, world news and all like that. So the Saturday Evening Post was a really popular one for that. Rockwell developed his pictures in a series of carefully planned steps. First, he drew a loose sketch of his idea. Next, he gathered together his models, costumes, and props and researched the background. Then he made individual drawings of each part of the picture in great detail, after which he made color sketches. Finally, he drew and painted his final illustration. So you can see, just like many other artists, there's lots of steps involved in his planning process. So kind of like the research, a loose sketch, and then going into greater detail and then adding the color. So lots of steps, lots of planning in art making. During the 1920s, Rockwell became rich and famous. He produced a cover illustration for the Saturday Evening Post nearly every month, and his salary was doubled. From 1919 to 1943, he created the covers for every Christmas edition of the Post. He also worked for other magazines, including The Literary Digest, Country Gentleman, Leslie's Weekly, hey, that's my name, Fudge, there's a magazine called Fudge, People's Popular Monthly, and Life, which Life you're probably still familiar with. But there's a little mock-up of the Saturday Post with one of his mock-up illustrations, and you see a little puppy there, looking all puppy cute. Not like any particular breed, just a little mutting along. The 1930s and 1940s were extremely busy. In 1930, 3 weeks after they met, he married his second wife, Mary Barstow. They had 3 sons, Jarvis, Thomas, and Peter. In 1939, just before the outbreak of World War II in Europe, they moved to Vermont from New York. Different sights and scenery gave him creative new ideas. In 1943, he painted the 4 Freedoms series, which became iconic works of art. He completed all 4 paintings in 7 months and lost 15 pounds in weight. See, I'm hard at work here, making a painting. And the little puppy's asleep on the studio floor. The 4 Freedoms series was inspired by President Franklin D. Roosevelt's speech describing universal rights: freedom from want, freedom of speech, freedom of worship, and freedom from fear. After appearing on the Post covers, the paintings toured America and raised millions of dollars for the war effort. The idea of freedom right now, right? Like we're all locked in our homes. Freedom from fear kind of strikes me the most out of those freedoms. So we'll get those pictures up and see what that one looks like. In 1953, the Rockwells moved to Massachusetts, but in 1959, Mary died suddenly from a heart attack. 2 years later, Rockwell married his 3rd wife, Molly Punderson, who encouraged him to move on from the Post to make covers for Look magazine instead. His last of 361 covers for the Post was published in 1963. Rather than family issues, his new illustrations highlighted social issues, including civil rights, poverty, and space exploration. Ooh. In 1977, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Ford. Over his career, Rockwell created more than 4,000 paintings for books, magazines, and all sorts of publications. He died in 1978 and aged 84. Okay, so that was Norman Rockwell, and that was cool because I didn't know too much of his history. Certainly didn't know he had 3 wives. All these artists getting married and remarried. Crazy people. But yeah, so I like the idea automatically. It just struck me like the social idea, the social justice ideas. So if you're drawing things after my readings and following along with that, I would love to see a drawing that you make about a social issue that you feel strongly about. And it could be something related to everything that's happening right now with COVID-19. Maybe it's a social message to stay home and stay safe so that people on the front lines, doctors, nurses, mailmen, male women, male people, and postal workers, anybody who's still having to work while facing COVID, like what's that about? So make a social justice piece about that. Or any other, right now that's just everything, right? I can't even think of making art about any other issue, but there's plenty of issues wrapped up around that, and I'm going to stop talking now because it's Friday, my brain is mush, and I'm just going to try to make this video better with all the little doodads I put in, alright? So make me some art. Make me an illustration for a magazine cover. Maybe you make up the name of the magazine too. It could be Miss Grace's Weekly Magazine or whatever. Alright? Mwah. Love yous.